Welcome to Powerssquared Raw and Real. This is number 37. I'm MA.
And I'm JL.
I'm coming to you live from my stairwell because this seems to be the only place in my house I'm getting any internet at the moment.
I'm in my office. What can I say?
Not that our productions were very high quality in the first place, but we'll just find out how it goes.
There you go. There you go. Well, we were a few weeks ago, we've taken a brief hiatus because we were trying to finish up book 2 in the Broken Circle series and get that off to the publisher, and which is Akashic Books. So hopefully they'll love it, and hopefully we'll have news to announce at some point. But in any case, so we took a little hiatus, which means like we started your story about your experiences in evangelical Christianity, and then eventually your deconstruction and your decoupling of your identity as an evangelical Christian to something else, to be TBD, right?
Right, sure. Life is a process. It doesn't end until you're 6 feet in the ground, right? So
that's right. So so we didn't get very far. We were actually at your teen years, and I want to get us back there pretty rapidly. But I wanted to ask a question because during this few weeks hiatus, you posted a couple things on your Facebook page where you got a little political, and you talked about how sad really it makes you when you think about the evangelical support for Donald Trump, because Donald Trump seems very antithetical to the values that you grew up understanding were Christian values and biblical values of Christianity and Jesus. And I wanted to kind of start there with asking you a question about what were all of the things that you valued about being a Christian? And what were the things that you really loved about it that you still maybe miss? Or if you maybe don't miss them, they're still a part of you today? Or that's sort of...
Sure. I guess I like the funny thing is I've read some interesting books even even between the last Raw and Real and now, and so I've been thinking about many things, including when we were young, the interconnectedness between the Republican Party and the evangelical Christian movement was just beginning to really be knit together. The late 80s. That's when James Dobbs and Focus on the Family started to really become political. Prior to, I think, the mid 80s, they had been much less in the political world. And other leaders. I mean, there's Jerry, the Falwell group. There was always interconnectedness with politics there, and then there was the 700 Club, and you can name off all these lists of people who really became political. But when I was younger, since I was just becoming up, my ideal of the perfect person, and this comes from kind of an American, an all old American view of what a man was and what a godly man was all interconnected. And some of it's good and some of it's terrible, just like all things. But I had this view that a Christian person and a Christian man was not somebody who was self-promoting, was not somebody who bragged about what they did, was not somebody who went about their business as if they had done it before, and that, like, you know what I mean? But the one thing that I did appreciate, that's not so much biblical, that's more just Americana, kind of the ideal of the stoic man who doesn't toot his own horn type of thing, or woman too, although I have to admit back then things were very gender specific, and males within the Christian world, that was, you were a leader, you could only be a leader if you were male in a lot of ways. Not 100% of the time, but it was a strong push there. So anyways, I guess the ideal that I've been thinking about recently is what is love, right? Love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it is not rude, it is not proud. And so the ideal in the evangelical Christian world that I was growing up was that God was love, okay? And so what was love? Those things that I just listed off, God, Jesus was supposed to be the personification of God as love, right? And so all those things were supposed to be listed as attributes of somebody who knew God and was godly, right? And so that was back in that was back in those innocent years. So I guess I still think of that, and I still think about the idea that there is truth, that you can find it, and that there is a specific truth. Now, why that's so important to me right now is, quite frankly, a totally different book. It has nothing to do with religion, but it's a very small little book, and it's really impacted me. It's called On Tyranny. It's by Timothy Snyder. He's a law professor not a law professor. He's a professor of history, I believe, at Yale Law School, or Yale, I think. But anyways, you can look up Timothy Snyder, and he just goes back. It's a very small little pamphlet almost. It is a book, but it's almost like a pamphlet, and it's the 20 lessons that fascism of 20 lessons to be learned from fascism in the 20th century. And one of them is, when you can't tell what is true and what is not true, then you're going to run into huge problems. You have to believe that there is real truth out there, because if you don't, then anything anybody says that you like then becomes your truth, whether or not there's any truth to it or not. If you feel it, then it's your truth. Mm-hmm. And he has specifics about people within the Nazi Party who were against it, but at some point they kind of were like, well, some of what they're saying here kind of makes sense, and so as they slowly just tilted right into the Nazi Party, because there were aspects of it that they liked, and they eventually ended up being people who were against the Nazi Party who then joined it, because it was such a strong appeal, even though there was no ultimate truth within that. And so with that being said, I believe that the evangelical Christian world being tied to a very hawkish party, and a party that believes in this viewpoint of power and might does have a strange biblical background to it, and I think that the evangelical Christian world has gone into a theology that its ultimate endpoint is violence. Mm-hmm. And this is what I mean, because it starts out, let me see if I can lay this out for you relatively succinctly, but it starts with Adam and Eve. When Eve fell, and then was supposedly brought Adam into that, and Adam fell, then God violently threw them out of the garden, okay? Mm-hmm. And the reason why I say violently, it doesn't say that, but he took them out of the garden, and then he had an angel with a sword guarding the Garden of Eden, so they couldn't come back in. So there was something with a weapon saying, you cannot come in here, all right? Mm-hmm. And so it starts with the idea that when you do something wrong, then something violent will happen to you, okay? Mm-hmm. This is a deep theological river that flows within, I think, the evangelical world, and has now been tied to the hawkish right wing of the conservative party. So it starts with that. Then it goes into the idea that if you are somebody who does not believe in God, okay, and this gets into Exodus and Leviticus, if you are somebody who doesn't believe in God and doesn't believe in the right way, then it is okay for you to be subjected to genocide. And so the Jewish people were not only allowed, they were commanded to take this country and kill all the people, the children, the women, the animals, to make way for the godly people, right? So now we're getting into a theology. If God is for you, then you have the right to take from the ungodly, okay? And so it moves from that sphere, from, okay, when we fell, God violently took us from one place and put us in another and said, I will keep you out with weapons from this place. And then when they came back to God, I'm not saying this is right theology. This is what I'm just saying, that this is a strain within the evangelical Christian culture. So then you get into now they are right with God, and God commands them to basically take by violence and by bloodshed another land, and it's okay because those people are not right with God. And so then you move along within the arc of the Old Testament, and you have heroes of the Old Testament, say, who were not the best of people. There was Samson in the Bible, who wasn't that great a person, but God gave him strength when he followed these specific rules, and the end point was that he destroyed himself and everybody around him because God gave him the strength to tear down, the walls of the building that he was in, and it killed all the Philistines. And so he was a hero because he eventually was able to destroy his enemies. And then it moves.
And I've heard it said that some evangelicals saw before the election, saw Trump in sort of a Samson.
Sure.
Like, he's not that righteous. Neither was Samson, but he's the instrument of God,
Right, exactly. And so I'm getting to this point here where, to make things right, you need to have a leader like Joshua, okay, who says, we are going to go and we're going to do this. God has commanded us to do this. Strap on your swords, strap on your shields, and we're going to show no mercy, okay? Right? And this is somebody who is anointed by God. What happened? So then we get to Saul, the first king of the Jewish people, and when he is right with God, he is, basically taking over the land, defending it from people. But when he turns from God and the Spirit is taken away from him, his life and his son's life are taken by his enemies in battle. Okay, so you will be killed violently if you are not right with God. Okay, and so then we move on within the Jewish, the Jewish arc and narrative, where you have them turning from God, the Jewish people turning from God, and then they are captured by the Babylonians. Okay, and so the idea is, if you as a nation, God has given you this nation, and you are a godly people, but you turn from God, then you are subject to being violently overrun and taken by the heathens, right? And so there's precedent with the idea that, like, if you're with God, he gives you might and strength, and you will strike down your opponents. But if you turn from God, then he will send people to destroy you, basically, right? And so the Jewish people get back with God. They make it back to the promised land, and then the Romans they lose whatever the narrative is, they lose it, and then the Romans come and eventually destroy the temple, and it hasn't ever been rebuilt, right? And that is a strong the idea that was coming up when I was a teenager, was the idea that if we let the Roman Empire then became this massively strong empire because they turned to God, Constantine, blah, blah, blah. They controlled the world. But as soon as they started turning away from that again, then they fell. All right. And it would be whatever the sin of the day was, right? In this case, we were all going to the heathens were going to destroy the U.S. The narrative was the U.S. had been a godly nation at some point, which iffy. If you really look at history, there were certain pockets of it that were, but God, if you look at it as a whole nation, not a very godly place. It wasn't set up to be necessarily a Christian nation. It was set up to be somewhere where there was religious freedom. But the arc is that we, set this up. God blessed us. That's why we're where we are. And now if we, start allowing abortions, if we start allowing homosexuality to flourish, then we are going to be destroyed, and we're going to fall as a nation. And so the only way to be saved from all those heathens that are out there in your society is to have a strong man, a David, right? Or a Samson, or some strong leader who comes up and makes everybody follow God, okay? And it's imperative that they make people follow God, because if they don't make people, however that make is, and it's always with a sword, right? Then your nation is going to be ultimately destroyed by an avenging God who allows, the Muslims, the secular humanists, the whatever,
the feminists,
the liberals, the communists, the socialists. They're going to take over the nation and take it away from godly people, and they will have to live in exile until they repent of their sins. And so with that,
you saw that strain, and you saw it too as a teenager, but you just feel like it's become much more dramatically enhanced.
It has. It's gotten to the point where people are willing to totally. That is the important strain within, I believe, the theology of the evangelical Christian worldview now. Not the idea that, my idea would be that God becoming man was enough. That was enough, right? If Christianity is true, and if Jesus is really God, then that should be enough. Everybody should be able to be saved now because God became man. That is the miracle. Being killed on a cross, that's just what happens when you have a violent society. That's not the important thing. The important thing is that God became man. That's in my world thinking. And my worldview would be that everybody can be saved because we have a merciful, loving God. If I believed anything, that would be what I would want to gravitate towards, not that we have a God who demands that we follow certain rules and certain dictates, and if we don't, then we will be
forever.
We will be, at the wrong end of the sword, basically.
So when you wrote all of that, the thing that you were longing for, or that you're sad about, is this real strain of love and mercy.
Sure,
and
right.
It felt like is one of the best parts of
Christianity. I would think that love, mercy, and acceptance, and that's, I don't know, that's what I feel like should be. Again, as I said, it says to be wise as serpents and gentle as doves, and they've remembered to be wise as serpents and get their people in power, but they've forgotten to be gentle as doves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let's take this back to then your teen years, unless there was more you wanted to say right there.
No, that's just my thought on why you would have, I guess my thought is why you would have this dichotomy where somebody like me would be like, why in the world would an evangelical at all vote for Trump? Because my idea of the importance of Christianity is the idea that God is love, and there is no, Trump, Mr. Trump. You can't say Mr. Trump is patient. You can't say he's kind. You can't say, that he isn't rude. that he's not proud. There's not one of the attributes of love that describes Mr. Trump, not a single one of them. And so you have basically the shambles of and the end point of this theology of might makes right. And we have to make people do the right thing, because if we don't, then we will be taken over by the horde, is basically, and that's why they'll vote for a guy who is the antithesis to what I think is important, if you believe in evangelical Christianity. So that's my take on it. Like it makes sense.
Sadly,
it sadly makes sense. At first I was shocked, but then I thought about it a little longer, a little harder, and realized that people just want people to tell other people how to behave, and so they're looking for a strong man who will make other people, and that's antithesis to the US, right? Because the whole point of the US system is that you have to compromise, because you have different viewpoints and different parties, and everybody's electing these different people.
I think we're seeing this strain from all sides, though, too.
No, I agree.
We're certainly seeing from the left a strong. I mean, it's so apparent on the right, but I think we're seeing it on the left too, with a strong kind of censoring of certain types of speech.
Sure, what did they? I heard it today on NPR. They were talking about it's the explosion of tabooism.
Right. right.
And that there's just so many things that are now taboo that you can't talk about or can't be about, or you're either in this crowd or that crowd, and you can't make a joke about this, but you can make jokes about that. But God, don't get close here, because if you do, these were comedians. They were talking that too. So
I'll have to check that out, because it's been a deeply concerning issue for me that I've been a little bit obsessed about lately.
It's especially when we're involved in publishing, like you have to be, because how are people going to react when the sentiment behind something that is said may be so different than the reactionary to a taboo. In fact, it might be the absolute opposite of the reaction that people are knee-jerkingly doing because of that rise of, there's all these things that we just can't say. You can't say that.
Right. Yeah, no, anyway, but now we're like way off topic. But sure. I just was recognizing that we have similar strains of, might makes right, with just different focus.
No, that's right. That's right.
Focal points from different sides, but nevertheless some, strong movements on each side that seem deeply problematic for how we live as Americans, or how we live as people. It doesn't matter about being American or not. Actually, I no, really.
I've been thinking about it. What makes people great is not being right.
Right.
That doesn't make somebody great. What makes somebody great is how they comport themselves when they are right, how they comport themselves when they find out they're wrong. It's your action of who you are deeply within yourself that is real truth. It's not, I do believe in truth. Like there are things like you drop a hammer, it's going to fall on the ground. That's a fundamental truth of gravity, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I can drop that hammer on somebody's head intentionally to hurt them, or I can use it to build a house, right? That you're using a fundamental truth in two very, very different ways. And it's true. Yeah, it fell, but, and I knew it was going to do that, but you gotta do it in the right, it's almost more important how you do things than it's more important how you do the right thing or even the wrong thing than doing the right or the wrong thing. Because if you're doing the wrong thing right, you realize it. and you start doing the right thing. If you do the right thing in a totally awful wrong way, then you're doing the wrong thing, really, right? Because you can't make people do what you want. You can only, you're only as strong as your ability to graciously argue, I think.
Right. Right. All right. So back to your teen years when you were
so that got me
invested in this worldview, not the one you've just described, but the worldview of.
Well, I did, but then, of course, I think I went on the discipleship training course with Youth with a Mission, where you have 3 months where you're supposed to do, we've talked about it with you, where you're in this school. Yours was in Australia, and mine was in Maui, Hawaii. So pretty cool, too. And then I did 3 months in Japan, and I think that's where the cracks really started for me, because I realized that, well, you know, they started before that, actually. They started when I was in, again, when I was in London, and I was in a primarily Muslim neighborhood, and talking to people that I realized for the first time in my life believed what they believed as strongly, if not more strongly, than what I believed. Because basically in the United States at the time, if you weren't kind of a rabid evangelical, you, like, most people seemed pretty wishy-washy and really didn't know what they believed and didn't really care all that much, right? And so it was almost,
that was our perception.
That was our perception. Sure. It may not have been true because I wasn't running into the right people, but I think for the most part, I think it was true in a lot of ways. I'm not talking like, you know, 99% of the time. I'm talking like, yeah, 80% of the people out there really are just living their lives, which there's nothing wrong with that. They don't have necessarily this huge, strong conviction. But I was in my head, I was thinking that conviction and being around a lot of people who had strong convictions must make it true, because how else would you have such strong convictions, right, if it wasn't the truth? And so running into people who had as strong convictions, if not stronger convictions, and something that was considered from our worldview as wrong, all of a sudden that crumbles, right? You run into people who really...
That can't be the basis of truth.
Right.
No matter how strong your belief is, that doesn't make something true.
Exactly. Like your strength of conviction exactly has no bearing on truth. Unfortunately, right? And so you can be sincere as hell and wrong as hell at the same time. So anyways, that was kind of the start of the cracks, and it made me think, but not tons, but just make me think a bit. And so then I went on the discipleship training, and it started to grow a little bit because I started to run into people who were anti-intellectual. And for the most part, I have to say that I ran in a pretty, the people that I ran in with were not anti-intellectual for the most part in the evangelical world. There were some who were there, but for the most part, the people that I was involved with and the people who were my friends, almost all of them were like, yeah, I'm going to college, I'm doing this, you know, becoming doctors, business people, that kind of thing.
Yeah, most of them went on to become professionals, in fact. Doctors, lawyers.
Right, exactly. Doctors, lawyers, and stuff. So there was not this, there were definitely a few people who were anti-intellectual, but for the most part they were not. But when I was in Youth with a Mission, I ran into a very strong strain of people who believed that if you went to college, you basically would turn away from God. And so intellectualism was anti-Christian, and who knows, maybe it is. I don't. Yeah, obviously, you know, I continued, you know, kind of moving away from that strain as I became more and more educated. But I was like, it can't be, like, because education, in my mind, I was like, this can't be right, because I know, just without a lot of, like, intellectual gymnastics that the pursuit of knowledge is the pursuit of truth, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're pursuing truth and it doesn't align with what you believe, then something's got to give. And I sure hope to God I'm going to end up on the side of truth, not just some emotion that I have, right? And so then I started to wonder, well, you know, there's this huge strain of people who are anti-intellectual, and the intellectual pursuit is often a pursuit of trying to discover what truth is, especially when you're, you know, when you're in certain fields. It's a lot easier to discover the truth because there often is a right or wrong answer, in the sense that, like, you experiment and you experiment and you experiment and you experiment, you try and disprove what you're doing, and you eventually come to the conclusion that I've tried everything that I can possibly, you know, think of to disprove what I've discovered, and it still holds true. So this is the best truth I have until something more truth comes along, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's the pursuit of science, and that's what I did. I went after my DTS, I went to college, and of course there we were never in a family that was like just rabidly anti-evolution. And so it didn't bother me as much, but man, I ran into a lot of Christians. It was really difficult for them to hear about evolution. Of course, I went to a secular state school, and so that's whatever, you know, if you're in science, you gotta believe in you have to be confronted with evolution and the theory and why it's been such a profound effect on the world. And so then you start to understand that, like, okay, if you believe in Christianity, it's really difficult to take the Bible literally. Like, and I'm not sure you should take the Bible literally, because that's not a truth that is reconcilable. Because then, and then I discovered real quick after that, of course, I never really took Genesis literally, like the literal 7 days, and then of creation, and that the world is only 10,000 years old. So it was easy for me to be like, oh yeah, this makes sense. The world's, billions of years old, and creation is not a 7-day event, and lots of things happen. And so then it's easy to make the leap for me. All of a sudden I understood that, like, people who were telling me, no, you got to take certain things literally, didn't take everything in the Bible literally either. And so then it was up to interpretation as to what you should take literally and what you should not. And that had to do with your tradition within your church. Like, most people don't run around, trying to gouge their eye out or cut their arm off because it's sinned, like Jesus said, because the point of what Jesus was saying, if your eye causes you to sin, gouge it out, was to think about sin and how its effect was on you, not to literally gouge your eye out. And right. These people knew that, but right. You can take that scripture literally and think, oh God, I got to cut my hand off because it causes me to sin. Of course, it didn't cause you to sin, but you know what I'm saying? So, and so they had a tradition where they weren't even taking, even though they were literalists, they weren't taking the Bible literally. And so all of a sudden, then everything's open for interpretation. Your whole biblical worldview is open for interpretation. Not
were there, let me interrupt, were there either during your DTS or during your college years, were there people that either kind of pushed you towards, because of things they did, advertently or inadvertently, pushed you towards rethinking your Christianity, either in a in a positive sense towards, like, right, oh, I really want to be a Christian, or in that, I mean, not that I'm saying it's negative, but in the sense of, well, I'm gonna leave, I really don't want to be here, like, we're right. No, I was still in college. I was still pretty like, yeah, this is, I can deal with this intellectually. I don't have the same, like, way of looking at the Bible and Christianity as the kind of mainstream evangelical culture, like, but I was also, one thing happened, that I was just
sickened by, quite frankly. And it was, they had one of those evolution versus creation debates at our school. And of course, it was this professional debater who was debating about creationism. And then it was just, you know, some chemistry professor debating on evolution who wasn't a professional debater, right? Mm-hmm. Didn't have the resources necessary. And he didn't, I doubt he knew what he was getting into. Although on one hand, I think he kind of did, because the first thing he said is, I'm here knowing that in debate terms, I'm probably not going to win, but somebody needs to step up for the truth, right?
This was the chemistry professor?
This was the chemistry professor. So he was debating the evolution, and then this professional Christian was debating, creationism. And I could just, most of the people who showed up were Christians. And every time this debater would say some point, whether it was just wildly stupid, wildly wrong, or whatever, it was a dig at evolution, like the whole crowd was just like cheering and yelling and like, la, 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 la. You know, and there was a few college students there from the College of Science. And I just was like sickened at, like, you were never going to win over people this way. Like, you want to have
you were sickened by the Christians' behavior, basically.
Yes, exactly. This cheering. I was just sickened by the Christians cheering and like these points, and like, and they had no idea. It was just that, you know, they were there to cheer on their viewpoint, and they didn't really care about the truth. They had no idea what the real scientific viewpoint was. They didn't give a shit about truth or scientific viewpoint. All they wanted to do was rah, 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 because they wanted their beliefs to be validated in front of the intellectual crowd or whatever. I don't know what it was. But anyways, it sickened me to have my foot in that culture and to be known as a Christian by these other college students who were there just to support the professor because they were.
You knew them?
I knew them. Yeah, I knew them. You know, I knew them, and one of them was a good friend of mine, Krishna. We studied together. He was from, his parents were from India. He was just like this brilliant guy, and he, you know, none of this. I was just so, I had to leave early, him and I just pulled him aside and I was like, I don't agree with any of this. This is just not okay, because I was still kind of a Christian and let people know that. And after that, I was much less, I was just pretty ashamed of the whole thing, because I knew that Christians didn't care about truth. They didn't care about listening to the other side and trying to understand why they would think what they thought. They only cared about shoving what they believed to be the truth down other people's necks at all cost. And that's just not the way to live. And you will make your believers be more and more extreme with that kind of behavior, but you won't really get new people in that way. That's not how you behave. It's just not how you behave in any kind of cultural setting. And so, I was like, I just can't be like that. I can't. And so that started to move me further away.
What did your friend say when you said that?
Oh, he was like, oh, yeah, I know. That's pretty much what he said. Yeah, I know. So, it's hard when people, like, that's what people think Christians are, because that's how they behave, right? Mm-hmm. And you are how you behave. That is who you are. You may say you're one thing, but if you behave in a different way, that's who you are. right? So so you can say you're loving and you want, but what you really want is just to make everybody be what you want them to be. And that's true on the left too. I'm not, and there are plenty of there's plenty of asshole atheists out there, but I think that's partly a reaction to the assholery on the Christian side. So
yeah, I remember telling actually a friend of mine a while back, I said, this was actually, I was pregnant with Nesta, so it would have been, you know,
right.
8.5, 9 years ago. And I remember telling her, I had just met her for the first time. We were roommates at a writing camp together. And we had never met before that. And we were talking about things. And I remember telling her something about, you know, my leaving the faith. And at that point, it had been, you know, maybe 8, 9, 10 years or so since I had been a Christian. So it had been quite a while. But so I had been through the anger of it, right? And I was on the other side of the anger.
Right.
And I was talking about, and I had also been through, you know, Mom and I really struggled in my late 20s. And part of that struggle was her coming to accept me as a, you know, no longer a Christian, or at least not the type of Christian that she had always hoped for me to be. And it was also me struggling to accept her as her, you know? And when and so we had already come on the other side of that. And I remember talking to my friend, my new friend, about all of this and talking about how much I actually admired Mom, because I had seen her grapple with her hurt and frustration and anger over these things and come out on the other side to a place of real love for me and grace, you know?
Yeah.
And I was telling her that, and she said, and my friend was like, that's really, she didn't say exactly this, but she was like, that's really big-hearted of you, or something like that. Like, and I was like, no, that's not what it's about. What I have come to realize is I have seen people use Jesus to justify their bad behavior. And I've seen people use Jesus to make themselves be a better person.
Sure.
I said, and what I came to realize was maybe the issue wasn't Jesus. It was maybe, you know, people are using that symbol, the symbol of Jesus, for very different ends. And it really has to do with the heart of the person.
Right.
And I said, I've seen people use Buddha to, I mean, let's look at the, you know, person that has, I can't remember her name right now, and I should, but the person that at one time had a Nobel Peace Prize, and she's Buddhist, and she's really behind the genocide of the, or partly behind the genocide of the Rohingyas. Like, she's using Buddhism to justify that kind of bad behavior. But I know Buddhists who, you know, use their Buddhism to become better people. And so I think what I had come to recognize was, and I still feel this way, is that some people grab onto something that helps them become a better person because they want to be a better person. And other people will grab onto that same thing to justify their bad behavior because that's what they want to do.
Sure. Yeah. No,
and so what we really have to do is look at ourselves and ask, you know, where is our heart, and is it leading us towards evil, or is it leading us towards good? And are we, you know, I don't know.
No, I do, because I think it's important. It's not, and I think this gets down to just fundamental little things. Like, it's not, there are, whatever it is we do in this life, there are thousands of people who are better at it than us. There are, like, you can look at life in a way that's like very cynical and very destructive, right? Just like there's no purpose, or you can look at life, whatever you do, as I'm moving forward and I'm becoming a better person because of my desire to be better. And I think that we can use all sorts of things. You can use your career to do that too. You can use it to be cynical and you can use it to try and get ahead and to grasp everything that you want in this life. Or you can use your career as an expression of you becoming a better person. Like, it's not good enough.
Make the world a better place.
Right. So it can be a very secular thing too.
Right.
You know, like, I'm going to be, you know, for us to be like, I'm going to be not just a publisher, because there are plenty of those publishers, but I'm going to do the best that I can, you know, when I'm publishing, because I have a heart for this, and I'm going to do it out of the heart that I have, not because I'm going to, you know, conquer the world, or, you know, I don't know, you know, yeah, but it is interesting because you come to those, I find it interesting because you come to that realization after much, I think, kind of a lot after you start losing that Christianity or whatever faith you happen to be in, because when you're growing up, for me and for you, it was synonymous. You become a better person by becoming a better Christian. So if I lose Christianity, can I be a better person? Right. And I think that was what I grapple with still sometimes, just subconsciously, as like, okay, if I reject this theology, can I be a good person? Right. Even if it's just subconscious, it's not on a conscious level. And I think it's absolutely true that like you could use Jesus to kill people, or you could use Jesus to be a better person, right? And so if you don't have Jesus, you can either be a better person for whatever reason, or not. Right. Of course, we could be great people and still burn in hell if we're wrong, right?
We shouldn't laugh so hard about this whole idea of burning in hell.
Right. But it's such a serious thing. You gotta laugh at it. Because like, people take it so seriously.
Well, I remember being like 8 years old, and maybe I brought this up already in an earlier version, but we had that friend down the street. He was really your friend, Jake, and he was Jewish.
Yeah, yep.
And I remember telling him, like, but you have to believe in Jesus. If you don't believe in Jesus, you're going to go to hell. And he was like, whatever, you know.
I know.
Okay.
And the thing is, like, we thought we were doing a good thing, you know, but we were probably just like turning people off forever, you know. Very sincere. Yeah, I remember a conversation sort of like that when I was probably 12 or so. And it was I had a friend, Mark Lorenz. It wasn't with Mark, but it was with his older brother, who was like 16 or something. And he was basically, so you're telling me, like, if I don't do just if I don't accept Jesus, that when I get up to heaven, he's going to be like, no, you're going to go to hell. And I was like, well, yeah. And he's like, well, I'll take my chances. And I was kind of like, man, I'm a terrible witness, you know, on the inside. But now that I'm older, I laugh. Because, I mean, that's kind of the culmination of that whole conversation. But it was a much longer, more involved conversation about, I think it had with evolution and all these other things involved in it at the time. So, yeah, that was funny with Mark's older brother. I'm trying to remember what his name is. Nathan. Was it Nathan? I don't know. Anyways, yeah, the upshot was, it was just laughing at me and being like, you know what? I think I'll take my chances.
That's pretty funny. All right. Well, you know, I certainly, since leaving the church, I want to get back to you in just a minute, but I've met, you know, several very good-hearted, honest, sincere evangelicals who really, really desire to have me come back. And some of them are really good people and lovely people.
Right.
Most of it, when they realize that that's not going to happen, our friendship fades away. And, you know, I mean, that is what it is.
Yeah, I know. I mean,
But I laughed recently. I mean, I both laughed and cried a little bit recently. I agreed to go to this big evangelical church in San Francisco because, you know, a new friend really wanted me to go. And I was like, all right, it's a cultural experience, although it's a culture that I know all too well. And going in that it wasn't, you know, he claimed it's completely different than any other church you've ever been to. And I was like, yeah, okay. Maybe it is. Great. Good for you if it is. And I went, and it was exactly like every evangelical church I've ever been to. And and I just I couldn't even bring myself to sing the praise songs because I was just so not into the group psychology.
Yeah, right.
I mean, you know, and it wasn't that I was trying to be disrespectful, but it was just I can't even sing these because none of the I don't believe in any of the words. I actually find words sort of horrific sometimes, you know. And this is clearly group psychology. You've got dim lighting, you've got this gorgeous band up of, people wearing skinny jeans and cool, being super cool. And you're creating this mood so that people worship, and I'm not buying it. And I'm not going to fall into this, emotional trap that you're creating for people. And if, it's just not going to happen for me. And then there was this long sermon of an hour-long sermon about prophecy. And I was just like, oh my gosh, this is so long. And my friend afterwards, who's such a nice, sincere, amazing person, was like, did you like the sermon? And I was like, it was okay. It was like his whole face fell. But what I really appreciated, because then there was this whole, altar call of people who were supposed to come forward if they wanted either a prophetic word spoken over them or they wanted the gift of prophecy or whatever. And he said, don't go anywhere yet. And, stay right there. And then he went over and huddled in this little circle with some friends of his, and they were all praying. And I knew they were praying for me. I was like,
I know, I've been there.
Oh my God, okay. I'm just
we've been there. We've done that. We've had people pray over us and pray for us and lay hands on us and speak in tongues over us. So, yeah.
And I was just like, well,
had that experience.
The thing that I was trying not to do was have my hands folded because I wasn't actually feeling defensive. I was just like, but I didn't know what to do with my hands because I'm not going to raise them and I'm not singing, but I don't want to do this because that seems defensive, and I actually don't feel defensive. I'm just like, okay.
It's another thing.
And so I knew they were praying for me, and then, he came over and he was like, can I pray for you and your family? And I was like, sure. I mean, I don't you want to pray for me and my family? I actually appreciate that. That's great. Don't have a problem with that. And he said, but I have to be honest. I really, really, because he had told me at the beginning, I'm just praying that God has a prophetic word for you today. And he just said, I have to be honest. I don't have a prophetic word for you, but I'm going to pray for you anyway. And it actually brought tears to my eyes because I appreciated that he was just honest. He really wanted more than anything for God to give him a prophetic word for me that would change my life forever. But instead of manufacturing something or making something up, he was just like, I have to be honest. I don't have a prophetic word for you, but can I pray for you? And I actually super appreciated that.
We don't need that burden. We've already had those burdens placed on us from weird. I had, during my DTS, I had this one guy. He singled out two of us guys and he brought us out. He was like, the prophetic guy. And he's like, well, I've got some words for you guys. You guys are you could either be a David or you could be a Saul, and I see in your future becoming a Saul. If you don't I don't know if he's just I fear for you guys and blah, blah, blah. And so and I'm 18 years old and still, and this is one of the second or third days we're there, and I'm oh no, I'm gonna become a Saul.
Insert what the difference is for people that
So Saul was the first king of Israel, and he's kind of the whipping boy of a lot of the Christian church because he like took it upon himself to make sacrifices and do some other things that were against God's will. And so God took his favor from him. God had his favor on him, his spirit, and he was very successful. And then God took his spirit away from him, and he ended up being going kind of crazy and being this not very good king, and then being killed in battle eventually. And then David, on the other hand, was a nobody, supposedly, and then he gets anointed by God, has God's favor, kind of moves up from being a shepherd up to a war leader to becoming king, and then is basically considered the greatest king in the Old Testament by many standards.
He did worse things than Saul, if you think about it, including
David did very terrible things, but he still, was a man after God's own heart, right? I mean, yes, bad things happened to David too, because he did those bad things. So I'm not gonna I don't want to get into the whole theology. So anyways, okay. I'm there, and you've got the goat, who's Saul, and then you've got the great King David, right? So you've got the goat. So he's basically saying you could be the goat here, spiritual goat, or you could thrive. And I'm worried that you're going to become that spiritual goat, right? So this made this huge impact on me, and it's just me and this other guy. And this other guy, I'm just 18, real young. This other guy's 21 or 22, and so the guy, walks away. The prophet guy who's been speaking or whatever walks away, and we're just sitting there on the porch. And the guy turns to me and he's like, "I wouldn't sweat it. That guy doesn't know jack shit about us." He didn't say that, but he said that in all his emotion. He's like, he's never met us. He doesn't know who we are. I was like, oh, well, there's somebody who's kind of practical. He was the least spiritual of the people there, but with the least spiritual about somebody with a head on their shoulders, unlike some of the other, there were some other non-spiritual people, but they were usually on the verge of, they had other issues, and they showed up at DTS probably because they had those issues. So right. I don't know. But anyways, yeah, that was a pretty funny issue. And so here I am, the Saul, I've fallen away. I guess
that prophetic word was true.
I guess it was true, wasn't it? And now I'm going to hell.
I'm still waiting for the prophetic word spoken over me that I'm going to be the Esther of my generation.
There you go. You got the good one. Come on. Why couldn't I get the good one? I also had somebody saying things about I was going to do great things with my hands. And then, as I go on, I'm okay, so whatever you do, you basically do with your hands. So if I do anything that's great, then that's going to come true.
That's true.
We knew him. Oh, he was such a good nose picker. He did it so elegantly with his fingers of God. Sorry. All right, I shouldn't laugh. Those people have taken what they believe very seriously, but sometimes I guess all you got to do is laugh about it. So anyways, here I am, the Saul with magic hands, doing wonderful things.
Well, that's probably a good place to stop, because we've been going for almost an hour, and we can pick up again next week with your post-college and graduate school and everything that happened. So, yeah. And then eventually we'll get to talking about how all of this has influenced our writing, but we just haven't gotten there yet. Sorry.
You have to read our books. Read our books and you'll see it's all there.
It is there. Yep.
I say books. That's aspirational. Read our book. Actually, you have books.
I have books. Yeah.
Read our books.
All right. So anyway, I'm JL Powers.
I'm MA Powers. Have a wonderful evening.
Yep.
Right. Bye.
Bye.